This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. We begin by welcoming back after 2 weeks in Ireland, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former Attorney General, former Secretary of State Rufus Edmisten, Executive Editor of Carolina Journal, Rick Henderson, and syndicated columnist and author, John Hood. Well, on this 985th episode, we've got some great topics to discuss. We begin with the latest public school performance data that shows progress and stubborn concerns. We want to talk about the revolt of the UNC Board of Governors and a report showing that millennials think the economic system is rigged. And as usual, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get to it. The latest school performance data was recently released, and there's some good news to report along with some concerns. First, the good news. For the 12th straight year, our high school graduation rates rose from 85.8 to 86.5%. Overall, our students performed better on reading, math, and science tests. On the negative side, there was no improvement in third grade reading scores. And in the fourth grade, students actually declined slightly from the year before. Rick Henderson, we've put a lot of emphasis on getting our students to read, particularly in third and fourth grade at grade level. What do these third and fourth grade performance scores tell you?
It tells you that it's very, very difficult to get any kind of improvement quickly when you're trying to catch up if you've been falling behind. And what I think it tells us is that we've spent money on class size reduction. We've spent money on some teacher pay raises. We've sort of shifted the way that compensation is going toward younger teachers. But I think what we might need to start looking at now is looking at how, if you excuse me, how we teach teachers to teach. If we start looking at how our education schools and the career development programs for teachers are working, because if they are not really preparing people to go to the classroom, no matter how enthusiastic, how smart, how energetic, how compassionate they are, if they don't have the proper skills going into the classroom to impart knowledge to young kids, they're not going to be able to catch up when high school comes along.
Rufus, I was interested in one educator who said that classroom teachers are just being deluged by testing requirements in recent years, forcing them to spend more and more time in the classroom on meeting testing demands. And he was saying, I don't think it's as much that teachers don't know how to teach reading. I just think they don't have time in order to be able to properly devote to reading. My question is, what's more important in the long run, for students to really learn how to read or to prepare them for these standardized tests?
Well, Tom, I'll have to tell you, as a former third grade teacher, which most people don't believe, Rick, I can tell you that I agree with him tremendously, that if you don't catch it in the third and fourth grade, you're at a great disadvantage. Now, my sister, my whole family's been in teaching. The bane of their whole existence has been all this testing, filling out paperwork for somebody in Raleigh. And I think it's just ridiculous, and I think one of the best programs we ever had was the teacher helper, what's the technical name of that? Teacher's aide. I think those things make more difference when you let that teacher be hands-on to that student. And Rick, I couldn't agree with you more that the third and fourth grades, if they don't read by that time, it's
well,
hard
Phil Berger
sledding.
always says up to the third grade you're learning to read, and after that you're reading to learn.
And as Attorney General, if you haven't read and you can't read, you don't do well in anything else.
Yeah, John, let's move over to the high school graduation rate. We can remember back in the dusty recesses when we first started this show that the graduation rate was in the 60s. Now it's up to 86.5%. How much more upward room do you think we can achieve? Not every ninth grade student is going to graduate from high school.
Well, and this is a graduated 4 years measure, more or less. I actually think that the graduation rate increases recently are not good news. What I mean by that is that they're probably not real. If you look at the ACT scores, for example, for 11th graders last year, they didn't go up, they went down. There is increasing concern if you look at the number of students that have to be remediated, and some other measures. I'm afraid we are not all, the entire trend is not ephemeral. Obviously, we've had some significant gains in graduation, but I think some of the recent year upticks may be graduating kids who are not really prepared. They're not really mastering their high school level material. That's a concern. That's why the graduation rate has to be understood in the context of other kinds of measures.
Yeah,
I mean, you can make it 100% by passing everybody out of high
community
school.
colleges and universities say that they have to do about remediation work on about 70% of the high school graduates.
It depends on the school.
Chris, drilling deeper into some of this data, for the third year in a row, we issued letter grades. We've talked about this to the schools and school districts. This year, the number of low-performing schools increased and are now at 505, up from 489 last year. And the number of low-performing districts went from 10 to 11. Are we just not doing enough there to improve these low-performing districts?
Well, you know, there's a couple things where the General Assembly passed something called the Achievement School District, although they're not going to call it that, to try to go forward because it hasn't worked in other states. But we do have turnaround teams at DPI that made a presentation to the legislature that they were having some success but didn't have enough funding and no additional funding was given to them. You mentioned the letter grades. The thing that I still can't get over, and there's actually, this is not just all Republicans, the House Republicans for the last couple of sessions have tried to change the grade, the A through F grading system, to let growth be a bigger percentage of that. One of the things A through F.
I thought they did that.
No, they didn't do it. The Senate didn't go along with it. So 80% is still performance on one test score, which means the A through F grading system is largely an indicator of how poor the schools are. And there's some differences in that.
And the House wanted to make it roughly 50-50,
which is the least I think they could do. So we still have a ways to go.
No question about it.
I might have to say this. Some students are not as smart as other students, and we can't expect all of them to make A's. And I know that doesn't make me a very nice person, but it's just a fact of life.
Rick, recently the Phi Delta Kappa organization released their 49th poll asking parents if cost and location were not an issue, how many of you would choose to send your child to a traditional school? Just 31% said they would do so. Slightly more than half said they would keep their child in public school, even if they had funding to send them to a private or religious school. There are many people who are saying that this indicates that support for public schools is waning. Is that the way you read that?
That's one way to read it, certainly, is that there is a growing discontent with the way that that traditional public schools have been bureaucratized, that there's more and more uniformity expected. Rufus alluded to it to some extent, and that there are desires for alternatives such as charter schools, for opportunity scholarship program vouchers, as in North Carolina. And not too long ago, the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School District was actually considering asking the General Assembly to allow it to go to an all-charter system. And so there is interest in having more variability in curriculum and more flexibility in school days. I mean, there's research saying that, for instance, schools that start later in the morning are better for kids because kids aren't zombies walking around with no sleep. And so, I mean, there are all sorts of areas of flexibility that parents would like to take advantage of if given the chance.
And Chris, the enrollments in public schools have dropped slightly.
Right.
Does that help reinforce that notion that support is waning?
Well, I mean, there's a million things for that. It's the growth in the state, it's growth in the school-age population, it's where people are living. But I do think it's worth, I believe public schools have been under rhetorical attack for the last generation. I think that has had some play in it. I do think, we could disagree about that public schools have been underfunded. We still spend less on textbooks, whether it's digital or regular textbooks, than we did before the recession. We spend less per capita on education than we did before the recession. I think there's a perception in Raleigh and other places that we haven't supported public schools. I think that's correct. I think that leads to some of these people's frustration.
John, final question. There's a new federal law called ESSA that's in place now, and North Carolina has to submit their plans how to accomplish the goal of every student succeeds. The concept is already drawing criticism for many in the state because of so much emphasis on testing. We talked about that early. State Board of Education Chair Bill Kobe says it's hamstringing educators with testing mandates for school performance. Why is this the case?
Well, because the federal money is impossible to say no to. And so if you're going to take federal money, got all these accountability strictures attached to it, it's been a problem since the early 2000s. To put this in broader context, Tom, we don't really have the state test scores going back decades because we've changed the test back and forth. But if you look at national tests and how North Carolina's done on them, we had big jumps in performance in both measures from the early 90s to about the early 2000s. And after that, it's been bouncing around. So passing a federal law, and we can pass 4 more federal laws from different administrations, does not appear to correlate with progress.
Have you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter Spin Cycle? It's easy to do. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. And while you're there, you can view the latest NC Spin show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State at ncspin.com, NCSpin on YouTube, or on Twitter at NCSpinTweets. When we come back, we're going to talk about a UNC Board of Governors revolt.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I hear it all the time. Rising health care costs are squeezing North Carolina families. Deductibles continue to climb, prescription drug prices are skyrocketing, medical bills are unknown until they arrive in the mail, and premiums are increasing by double digits. This is decimating family budgets. We should be focused on education and jobs, not EpiPen cost and medical bill errors. We need quality, affordable, and transparent health care for our families.
Life's busy, but you are the master at managing it. Thanks to your know-how and some helpful tools. As a member of an electric cooperative, you have access to lots of innovative tools that help you better manage your home energy use and your budget, so you can stay focused on what's most important. Discover how your electric cooperative can help you control your energy use at EmpowerMeNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
In recent months, we've seen legislative and court challenges to the governance system of our state's public schools, but the most recent UNC Board of Governors meeting resulted in governance challenges to our public universities. In a surprisingly contentious session, the 28-member group challenged several basic assumptions, including what appeared to be a challenge to the authority of UNC President Margaret Spellings. In a series of resolutions not previously reviewed prior to the meeting by the board members, they voted to reduce tuition and fees at public universities while enhancing at the same time the quality of education. Then they formed study committees to consider reorganizing board meetings, reorganizing the UNC president's office, and perhaps even more, move the general administration from Chapel Hill to RTP in Raleigh. Rufus, BOG member Joe Knott said, "It would seem we're blurring the lines between policy and management, and I think this long term is a recipe for chaos. We're not equipped to run this institution." What's your reaction to the BOG and to Joe Knott's statement?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with Joe Knox because traditionally the Democrats have been just as bad as Republicans. However, I recall when Governor Holshouser, a native from Boone and a wonderful governor, during his era, the Democrats allowed about a third, I think it was somewhere close to a third, that was legislatively done, of Republican Party members. Today we have one party only, and the trouble is that people tend to get on boards and they think they can run the everyday nuts and bolts of an organization. No big corporation would attempt to dare do that. And the trouble about trying to run a university is that you run the risk of losing an accreditation. I went to that university. I don't want anybody messing with it, and I don't think this is really a partisan matter. I think it's meddling.
John, you remember hearing an interview we did with Bill Friday, who said at the time after the Consolidated University was formed, he opposed the 32-member Board of Governors, which was politically appointed for somewhat these very reasons, and proof perhaps could be found in the previous board just summarily firing former President Tom Ross for no other apparent reason than politics. Has this board decided it's going to become somewhat of a maverick? Is revolt the right term to use?
I think it's overstated. Essentially, part of what happened here is that the chair of the board and the president of the university waited waded into some controversial matters and appeared to speak on behalf of the Board of Governors without checking with the Board of Governors. So there are some growing pains here. There's a board here full of people who are not used to simply going to parties, sipping the wine, eating the cheese, and saying yes. Universities would love to have board members who do nothing more than get led by the staff. Now, some of what they're proposing might never happen. It might even consider it to be unclear exactly the rationale for it. Some of it, on the other hand, like reorganizing the way the board meetings are run, having certain kinds of presentations available by video, so you don't have these long stretches of people talking to a board in a room. People have to come all around the state to sit in a room. That's modernization. That's not meddling. Now, the fundamental problem here is this is a board, it has always been a board that is elected by the legislature. And ultimately to say, well, the board doesn't have any role to play here, defer to the staff, that is not the message that you want to send. And I guarantee you that if Bill Friday were around, he would be upset or disagree with some of what is proposed, but he would be handling this in a very smooth and effective way.
Chris, everything we've seen and heard about UNC President Margaret Spellings has given her very high marks for her administration, with the possible exceptions of charges of lack of communication about the Silent Sam monument on the Chapel Hill campus. But it seemed this board wanted to challenge and perhaps even rebuke her. Why is that? Is it justified?
Well, I don't know if it's justified or not. I don't think it is. It's certainly not justified the way they're doing it. This reminded me a little bit of the way the legislature is now operating. They brought up these resolutions at the last minute. Nobody had seen them. I think it's outrageous that the board would want to restructure President Spellings' staff. A lot of this is hard feelings. It's not a secret. The state Senate leadership did not want Spellings to get the job. They wanted somebody else. If you look at who was elected from the Senate, who wasn't reelected, the people who were on the search committee who picked Spellings were not reelected to serve on the Board of Governors. So this is an ideological battle inside the Republican Board of Governors, actually. And you saw Leo Daughtry, an NC Spin panelist, who was not very happy with the way this was done. It's ironic in a way, the people who were rebelling, or whatever the word you want to use, and were upset about that Spellings didn't check with the entire board, didn't check with their board members when they sent the letter. So they sort of were guilty of the same thing. I think it's more than growing pains. I think we have an ideological split in the board. I think some of it is some animosity toward UNC Chapel Hill because they think that's where every liberal in North Carolina
What
lives.
do you think about this proposal to potentially move the general administration away from Chapel Hill over to RTP or even Raleigh?
Well, if they move it to Raleigh, of course, the idea is that they can be closer to the General Assembly and
closer to NC State University also.
But twist some arms and maybe vice versa. But Chapel Hill has always been considered the flagship campus, and when Dr. Friday was president, there was this tension: is Chapel Hill, are NC State and UNC going to be the two flagship institutions, and everyone else have sort of a second-tier status, or are they all going to be a group of equals? Are they all going to be peer institutions? And that tension remains right now, and there still is an awful lot of envy of Chapel Hill, and the board members tend to come from Chapel Hill, and so those who don't like it.
All right, so we've got a board that's giving President Spellings a lot of advice. I want to go around the table very quickly and ask, what advice would you give this new UNC Board of Governors, John?
They have some legitimate concerns, including the question about the balance between UNC Chapel Hill and the rest of the institutions. They have opportunities to pursue those concerns without breaking things up too much, and I think that President Spellings will handle this deftly.
But do it the right way. Is that what you're saying?
They're not bringing up issues that haven't been brought up before or that don't deserve attention.
No, but they didn't necessarily bring it up the right way, particularly not telling their own board members. Rick, what advice would you give?
They were a majority of the board. That's by definition, they talk to a majority of the board.
If I'm on your board of directors and you're proposing resolutions that I don't know anything about prior to going to a meeting,
that was their beef.
I'm going to get pretty PO. You can
check
count
with
on
the
Rick,
majority.
What would be
was
your
their
advice?
beef.
I would say keep calm and carry on.
Okay, Rufus, your advice.
Well, to think of the whole university system, and don't do something stupid that will cause us to lose accreditation. And that's
your primary concern.
Yes.
Chris, your advice.
I would definitely say calm down and learn about how the system works, and there's plenty of room to have honest, open, transparent debate. I don't think you should be reorganizing the staff of the president. I also think it's worth noting, all this has been attacks on UNC Chapel Hill, but NC State and Chapel Hill are a little different. They are research institutions that give PhDs, that have professional schools. Just by definition, they're different institutions. That's the way they were set up.
So is UNC Greensboro. There are others that do the same thing.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to ask, is the current economic system rigged?
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The North Carolina General Assembly recently gave state retirees a well-deserved cost of living increase. Now local governments across North Carolina need to follow the legislature's lead and include retiree cost of living increases in their budgets. These increases are long overdue and desperately needed by all our retirees. The legislature heard us, and they did what's right. It's time for local governments to do the same. Learn more at ncrgea.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
From the beginning of this year, the state's headline unemployment rate dropped from 5.3 to 4.1%. But some of that decrease does not show the number of people who are leaving the labor force altogether. According to an NC Budget and Tax Center report, the largest numbers struggling to find employment are the millennials. And the report says the problem is the result of public policy decisions that are being made, specifically giving more tax cuts to the wealthy and corporations, and the failure to invest in public infrastructure. Polls show that this group thinks the rules have changed and that hard work and sacrifice are no longer rewarded. They believe the deck is stacked in favor of the wealthy and corporations. In fact, only 42% support capitalism. Chris Fitzsimon, according to this report, many millennials believe the current economic order is a rigged game. Do you agree?
Well, I think that they believe, a lot of people believe that, not just millennials, if they've been in the workforce for the last 10 years and they feel like they've been working, or if they're lucky enough to still have a job after the crash and find another job, they've worked just as hard or harder and they haven't seen their wages go up. That's not a secret. I think that's a lot of the political unrest in the country. I think that's where a lot of the animosity comes from. If you've been working, you haven't had a raise, your cost of living has gone up, you pick up the paper, you see all this great economic news, the stock market's gone up, the unemployment rate's gone up, and you don't have enough money, the same amount of money as you did 2 years ago in terms of buying power.
Rufus, we've talked before on this show about the shrinking middle class. In fact, a report came out earlier this week that's showing that males are actually declining slightly in their median income. The loss of manufacturing jobs has obviously played a role in this, but is that the primary reason for the reduction in the middle class?
I don't think so. I think the primary reason is that now, as relates to the millennials, is that everybody thinks they got to be an IT expert. They think they're going to be the next person to invent Hewlett-Packard in the garage, and they don't get a good, sound education in any general thing, and too many people think they have to go to college.
Yeah.
We need more community college involvement, which is the best deal for the money, in my opinion, in the entire country, North Carolina.
The report says that the reason millennials are having so much trouble is because of policy decisions that are being made by our legislature. You buy that, John?
Not really, because this is a pattern that is evident in a variety of places around the country, some of which have Republican legislatures, some of which have Democratic legislatures. If you look at the data, you'll see that really around March or April in North Carolina, the unemployment rate continues to drop, but that's purely, as the report suggests, is purely because of declines in the overall labor force, even if there's a slight decline in the number of people employed. The problem is that's a very small sample survey, Tom. The larger sample survey shows about 27,000 jobs created since March. This is a good example of not jumping to conclusions based on premature data from small sample surveys. Period.
Rick, this report says that part of the reason is that we are not improving our infrastructure. We are not spending tax dollars to help invest in things that will bring jobs like public works jobs like we saw in the Great Depression. How big a factor would that be?
For millennials, I don't know if the public works jobs are going to be a really big factor at all. I mean, I don't see millennials working on construction crews very much. So, I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily, you're asking the question that you're going to get an answer that you expect to get.
Yeah, question. That happens often, no question. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
All right, well, I've just been informed we're running flat out of time. We got 90 seconds left. Has anybody got any really thing startling that they want to tell us, something we don't know?
I've got some good news. Elon University and High Point University, both in the triad, are #1 in their respective rankings again in Southern universities.
Anybody else real quick?
Walter Jones has just sent out a report where they've spent $50 million on a company out of England to train people in
Anybody
Afghanistan.
else?
There might be, we're going to have big changes in the way judges are elected no matter what, either new districts or merit selection.
Check Chuck McGrady's website and his Twitter feed for the constitutional amendments that are going to be discussed in October.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us at NCSpin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.